June 1944. 76 German U-boats could have ended D-Day before it began. One man stepped into their path. Captain Johnnie Walker, so exhausted he barely stood upright. He made a promise no one thought he could keep. 14 days, not one U-boat breaks through. A single mistake meant 40 ships lost and the invasion with them. His body was shutting down. What followed became the most relentless U-boat hunt of the war. I hope you feel what I felt bringing this story to life. The full version is linked in the channel description. Make yourself comfortable, subscribe, and let's jump in. The convoy stretched across the gray December waters like a procession of dark beetles. 43 merchantmen in 9 columns, their rust-streaked hulls rising and falling in the Atlantic swell. Commander Johnnie Walker stood on the bridge of his lead sloop, watching the formation through salt-smeared binoculars. 9 escorts for 43 ships. The mathematics were brutal, the odds worse. He had taken command of this scratch group only 8 days earlier. 2 sloops and 7 corvettes. Vessels whose captains he barely knew, crews who had never worked together. The Admiralty had given him a convoy to Gibraltar and told him to keep the wolves away. Standard procedure. Stay close, hover near your charges, react when the enemy strikes. Walker lowered the binoculars and felt the deck shift beneath his boots. Standard procedure was killing them. 2 U-boats sunk per month across the entire Atlantic. 400 escorts, and they were losing. Bridge, Aztec contact, bearing 270, range 4,000 yards. The report crackled through the voice pipe. Walker's executive officer turned, waiting for orders. The convoy steamed on, unaware. 4,000 yards, 2 nautical miles. Close enough to threaten, far enough to run. Signal Wild Goose and Deptford, Walker said. Form hunting line, bearing 270. We're going after her. The executive officer hesitated. Sir, standing orders are to maintain station with the convoy. I'm aware of standing orders number 1. Walker moved to the chart table, his fingers tracing the convoy's projected course. The U-boat had made contact, sent her sighting report to Lorient by now. Others would be converging. The wolf pack would form ahead of the convoy's track, waiting in ambush, unless he disrupted the pattern. The convoy maintains course and speed, he continued. Remaining escorts close up the gaps. We intercept before she can establish position for a pack attack. 3 ships peeled away from the formation, their wakes carving white lines across the dark water. On Starling's bridge, the Aztec pings came faster as the range closed. Walker watched the second hand sweep around the bridge chronometer. The U-boat would hear them coming, would dive deep, would try to slip beneath the thermocline where the sound waves scattered. Contact firm, sir. Bearing steady, range decreasing. Estimate depth 200 feet. Depth charges set to 150 and 200 feet. Prepare for attack. The sloop surged forward, her bow cutting through the swells. Walker felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the cold clarity that came before action. The U-boat commander down there in his steel tube was making calculations, choosing evasion tactics, trying to guess where the British captain would place his pattern. But Walker was not guessing. He was hunting. Fire! The charges tumbled from the stern rails and arced from the throwers, black cylinders spinning through the air before splashing into the sea. Starling's wake boiled white as she raced clear. 10 seconds. 15. The ocean erupted. Massive columns of water shot skyward, the detonations rolling across the surface in a continuous thunder. The sloop shuddered, her frame vibrating with the shock. Walker gripped the bridge rail and counted. 7 charges. 8. 9. 10. The water settled. No debris, no oil slick. Lost contact, sir. She's gone deep or broken away. All ships. Commence box search pattern. She's still here. For 6 hours, they quartered the area, 3 ships working in coordination, their Aztec beams sweeping the depths. The sun climbed toward noon and began its descent. The convoy was 30 miles ahead now, moving beyond supporting range. Bridge, Aztec. Contact regained, bearing 350, range 3,000 yards. She's running. Walker smiled. Running meant fear. Fear meant mistakes. The hunt continued through the afternoon and into the evening. Twice more they attacked, forcing the U-boat deeper, draining her batteries, consuming her compressed air. At 17 minutes past 8, as the December darkness thickened, the submarine broke surface 400 yards ahead, her conning tower black against the twilight. All guns, rapid fire, illuminate target. Star shells burst overhead, flooding the scene with harsh white light. The U-boat's deck gun crew scrambled topside, but Starling's 4-inch guns spoke first. The first salvo straddled the target. The second struck home, and flame blossomed behind the conning tower. 3 minutes later, the U-boat slipped beneath the waves for the last time, leaving only oil and wreckage spreading across the dark water. Walker ordered the rescue of survivors. 11 men pulled from the freezing Atlantic and turned his ships back toward the convoy. They rejoined the formation at dawn, 3 escorts resuming station as though nothing had happened. But something had happened. The mathematics had changed. 1 U-boat destroyed, 43 merchantmen delivered intact. Over the next 22 days, Walker's escorts sank 6 more submarines. 4 of them died more than 40 miles from the convoy they had been stalking. When the group returned to Liverpool, the Admiralty's assessment was swift and cold. Heretic or genius, the methods were unorthodox, the results undeniable. Admiral Sir Max Horton, Commander-in-Chief Western Approaches, read the action reports and made his decision. Walker would not be posted ashore. He would be given more ships, better ships, and freedom to prove his theory. The hunt was only beginning. The second support group had been at sea for 11 days when the Aztec contact came. 6 modern sloops, Starling, Wild Goose, Cygnet, Wren, Woodpecker, and Kite. Sweeping the western approaches in line abreast, their beams probing the depths for the enemy Admiral Horton had promised them they would find. It was shortly after noon on the 13th of June, 1942. The sky was overcast, the sea moderate, visibility good. Captain Walker stood on Starling's bridge, scanning the horizon with practiced eyes. The group had trained together for 3 months, drilling until every maneuver became instinct, every order anticipated. Now they hunted as a pack, and the wolves had become the prey. Bridge, Aztec. Contact bearing 090, range 5,000 yards. Submarine. Walker moved to the voice pipe. Classification? Strong echo, sir. Metallic. She's deep. He raised his binoculars, though there was nothing to see but gray water. 5 miles away, beneath the surface, a U-boat captain was staring at his own instruments, watching the hydrophone needles jump as 6 British warships converged on his position. Signal to group. Form line abreast. Interval 800 yards. Commence coordinated search. The sloops spread out across 3 miles of ocean, their Aztec pulses creating an invisible net. Walker studied the plot. The U-boat had been running on the surface, charging batteries perhaps, when the lookout spotted masts. She had crash-dived, but not quickly enough to escape detection. Contact firm, sir. Range 3,000 yards, bearing steady. Depth estimated 500 feet. 500 feet. Deeper than most captains would dare. This one had nerve. All ships stand by. Starling attacking. Normal pattern, depth settings 200 and 300 feet. The sloop accelerated, her bow wave building. The Aztec pings came faster, rapid metallic clicks that echoed back from the submerged hull ahead. Walker watched the range close. 2,000 yards, 1,500, 1,000. Fire! 10 depth charges arced into the sea. Starling's wake churned white as she cleared the blast zone. The ocean convulsed, great columns of water erupting skyward, the detonations merging into a single prolonged roar. The sloop bucked and shuddered, her plates groaning under the shock. When the tumult subsided, the Aztec operator's voice came through the pipe, frustration evident. "Contact lost, sir. No wreckage, no debris." She went deeper. All ships, box search, tightened the pattern. For 3 hours, they quartered the area, 6 ships working in perfect coordination. At 1600 hours, Kite regained contact. The U-boat had moved 2 miles east, still deep, still running. Walker made his decision. "Signal to group. Prepare Operation Plaster. Starling, Wild Goose, and Kite will attack in line abreast. Continuous pattern, shallow and deep settings mixed. We'll shake her loose." The 3 sloops formed up, 800 yards between them, and began their run. The first charges tumbled from Starling's stern. Before they detonated, Wild Goose's pattern followed. Then Kite's. The ships advanced in line, each dropping charges every 20 seconds, creating a rolling barrage that walked across the ocean floor. The sea became chaos. Explosions merged into continuous thunder. Water boiled skyward in enormous fountains. The sloops shook violently, their frames protesting the punishment. 86 depth charges in 3 minutes. A storm of high explosive that turned half a square mile of ocean into a killing ground. Below, in U-202's control room, Captain Lieutenant Günther Poser gripped the periscope column as his boat shuddered under the onslaught. The lights flickered. Cork insulation rained from the overhead. A gauge shattered, and compressed air screamed through the breach. "Chief, take her down. Slow ahead both motors, 700 feet. The engineer's voice was tight. "Sir, test depth is—" "I know the test depth. Take her down." The depth gauge needle crept past 600 feet. 650. 700. The hull groaned, a deep metallic protest that set teeth on edge. 750. 800 feet. The barrage continued overhead, but the explosions were distant now, muffled by pressure and depth. Poser's crew watched him in the dim emergency lighting, their faces pale, waiting. "Level off at 800. Minimum revolutions. Steer north." On the surface, Walker stood at Starling's rail, studying the disturbed water. No debris, no oil. The U-boat had gone deeper than his primers would reach. He turned to his executive officer. "She's below our range. Send to group, resume search pattern, but maintain contact. We wait." "Sir, she could stay down for 12 hours, perhaps 14 at most. Then her air gives out or her batteries die. We have time, number 1. Have the galley send up sandwiches." The sun westered and set. Darkness came, moonless and complete. The 6 sloops maintained their slow patrol, their Aztec beams holding the submarine in an invisible cage. Below, U-202 crept northward at 3 knots, her crew breathing stale air, her batteries draining with every turn of the screws. At 2 minutes past midnight, 800 feet down, the air finally gave out. Men were gasping, vision tunneling. Poser made the only choice left. Surface, emergency blow. Compressed air roared into the ballast tanks. U-202 shot upward through the black water, her bow breaking surface at a steep angle, shedding torrents from her casing. On Starling's bridge, a lookout shouted. Submarine surfaced, bearing 280, 400 yards. Starshell, all guns, commence firing. The night exploded into day. Parachute flares drifted overhead, casting harsh white light across the scene. 6 sloops opened fire simultaneously, their guns flashing orange in the darkness. Shells screamed across the water and crashed around the submarine. One struck aft of the conning tower and flame erupted. Poser stood in the shattered tower, revolver in hand, watching his boat die. Men stumbled onto the deck, abandoning ship. The cold Atlantic waited to receive them. "Cease fire," Walker ordered, close to pick up survivors. When Starling came alongside 28 minutes later, 16 men floated in the oil-slicked water. Captain Lieutenant Günther Poser was not among them. U-202 slipped beneath the surface at 0030 hours, her 9th and final patrol complete. The signal arrived at Starling's bridge at 0430 hours on the 29th of July. Captain Walker stood in the pre-dawn darkness, reading the decrypt by the red glow of the chart table lamp. Admiral Donitz had committed 150 U-boats to a summer offensive against the Atlantic convoy routes. The Bay of Biscay, that broad funnel of water between France and Spain, had become a highway for submarines departing their French bases or returning from patrol. Intelligence estimated 12 to 15 boats would cross the bay today alone. Walker folded the message and looked at his executive officer. "Rouse the group. All ships to action stations. We're going hunting." The second support group had been in Liverpool for exactly 72 hours. Barely time to refuel, rearm, and send the weary crews ashore for a night's sleep. Now 5 sloops turned their bows toward the bay, leaving Kite behind for boiler repairs. By dawn, they were driving south at 20 knots, the wind fresh from the northwest, the sky clearing to pale blue. Walker had studied the intelligence summaries during the brief port call. The U-boats were growing bold again, running on the surface in daylight when they crossed the bay, trusting to their lookouts and the vastness of the ocean to keep them safe from air patrols. Aircraft coverage was thin this far from England, and the Biscay bases were only 2 days steaming from deep water. The submarines felt secure. That security was about to end. At 0715, Starling's lookout called down from the crow's nest. Masthead on the horizon, bearing 180, extreme range. Walker swept his binoculars across the southern horizon. Nothing. He climbed the ladder to the platform beside the lookout, a young, able seaman named Phillips, whose eyes were reportedly sharper than the ship's optical rangefinder. "Where away?" "Dead astern of that low cloud, sir. 3 of them, I think, in line." Walker steadied himself against the mast and focused carefully. There, a flicker of vertical gray against the horizon. Then another. 3 conning towers, running south in column formation, their hulls invisible beyond the curvature of the earth. Range perhaps 8 miles, possibly 9. He dropped to the bridge in 2 quick strides. Signal to group. Enemy in sight bearing 180, estimated 9 miles. Increase to flank speed. Prepare for surface action. The 5 sloops surged forward, their turbines howling, white water boiling from their bows. 22 knots became 24, then 26. The range closed. 8 miles, 7, 6. Walker stood at the forward rail, watching the U-boats take shape. They were running at periscope depth plus a few feet, their conning towers cutting neat wakes, supremely confident. The British ships were hull down on the horizon, their low silhouettes easily mistaken for merchant vessels at this range. The German lookouts had not yet realized their danger. At 5 miles, Walker turned to his signals officer. An idea had formed, audacious and entirely fitting for the moment. Nelson himself might have approved. "Chief Yeoman, hoist General Chase." The signals officer stared. "Sir?" "You heard me. General Chase." "Aye, aye, sir." The chief yeoman's weathered face split into a grin as he bent to the flag locker. The signal flags broke at Starling's yardarm, a combination that had flown only twice before in the Royal Navy's long history. Sir Francis Drake had ordered it when he pursued the Spanish Armada up the English Channel in 1588. Admiral Lord Nelson had hoisted it at Trafalgar in 1805. Now, on a summer morning in the Bay of Biscay in 1942, it flew again. The meaning was simple and absolute. All ships independently engage the enemy. On Wild Goose's Bridge, Lieutenant Commander Wemyss read the signal and laughed aloud. On Cygnet and Wren and Woodpecker, captains grinned and called for more speed. The 5 sloops raced south, spreading into a loose line abreast, every gun crew closed up, every ship eager to be first into action. 4 miles. The U-boat still ran on, unsuspecting. 3 miles. On the lead submarine, a lookout finally noticed something wrong about those distant shapes. He called to his captain, urgency in his voice. 2 miles. All 3 U-boats saw them now. 5 British warships charging at flank speed, battle ensigns streaming, bow waves building. The submarine's deck crews scrambled for the hatches. Klaxons sounded, but they had waited too long. Walker raised his hand, then dropped it. "All ships, open fire." 24 4-inch guns spoke simultaneously. The salvo howled across the water, a rolling crash of thunder that echoed off the distant Spanish coast. The sea around the U-boats erupted in tall white columns. Shells screamed overhead, their passage tearing the air. The lead submarine took a direct hit on her conning tower. The shell punched through the thin plating and detonated inside, killing everyone in the tower and jamming the main hatch. She could not dive. Her captain, dying at his post, tried desperately to maneuver, but a second salvo straddled her hull. 3 shells struck in quick succession. Flame belched from her pressure hull, and she began to settle. The second U-boat managed to get her hatches closed and her vents open. She tilted bow down, her stern rising as she tried to escape. Woodpecker's guns found her at that moment, shells walking up her exposed hull from stern to bow. The 3rd round penetrated her engine room. She hung vertically for 5 seconds, then slid backward into the depths, trailing oil and air bubbles. The 3rd submarine's captain was quicker and luckier. He crash-dived the instant the first salvo fell, getting down to 60 feet before the British guns could bracket him. Starling and Cygnet raced over the swirl where she had vanished, their depth charges already set. 20 charges fell in a precise pattern. The ocean heaved upward, and when the disturbance cleared, a massive oil slick spread across the surface. Fragments of wood and rubber floated among the oil. The submarine did not reappear. From first sighting to last detonation, 10 minutes had elapsed. 3 U-boats destroyed, 75 German sailors dead or dying in the cold Atlantic waters. The second support group hove to, lowering boats to search for survivors. They pulled 11 men from the water, all from the first submarine, all badly wounded. Walker stood on Starling's bridge, watching his crew work. The General Chase signal still flew at the yardarm. Around him, his officers were jubilant, congratulating each other, replaying the action. 10 minutes, 3 kills. It was unprecedented. But Walker was thinking of the signal he would have to write when they returned to Liverpool. 3 more entries for the tally. 3 more crews that would never reach their bases. 3 more families in Germany who would receive the stark telegram. He felt no joy in it, only a cold professional satisfaction. The executive officer approached. "Shall I strike the signal, sir?" Walker looked up at the flag snapping in the breeze. Drake's signal. Nelson's signal. Now his. "Strike it, number 1. The flags came down. Wild Goose's signal lamp began flashing, requesting permission to resume patrol. Walker glanced at the chart. They were 200 miles from the convoy routes, with fuel for another 4 days at patrol speed. Affirmative to Wild Goose. Reform line abreast, resume southerly course. There will be more coming. The group reformed and steamed on, leaving behind 3 spreading oil slicks and the silence of the deep. The summer offensive Admiral Dunitz had planned was meeting its first serious check. In the Biscay bases, returning U-boats would report the encounter. The word would spread. The British were hunting now, not just defending. The tide was beginning to turn. But Walker knew the cost was rising on both sides. For every U-boat his group destroyed, another British ship went down somewhere in the Atlantic. The mathematics remained brutal. They had to sink them faster. As Starling drove south into the heart of the bay, a signals rating brought another decrypt to the bridge. It was from the Admiralty, delayed by several hours. Walker read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket. His executive officer noticed the change in his captain's expression. "Bad news, sir?" Walker stared at the horizon for a long moment. "My son Timothy has joined the submarine service. He's been posted to the Mediterranean fleet." The words hung in the salt air. Around them, the crew worked on, unaware. The sloops steamed south, hunting. Somewhere ahead, more U-boats crossed the bay, running for the Atlantic. The war continued, indifferent to fathers and sons. Walker turned back to the chart table. "Maintain course and speed, number 1. We have work to do." The general chase was over, but the hunt went on. The signal officer found Walker alone on Starling's bridge at dawn, staring at nothing. The captain had been there all night, motionless, his face carved from stone. The officer hesitated, then approached and saluted. "Signal from Admiralty, sir." "Priority." Walker took the flimsy and read it by the growing light. His son's submarine had been lost with all hands in the Mediterranean. No survivors. Timothy Walker was dead at 22, killed in action against an enemy his father had taught him to respect and fight. The signal officer waited, uncertain. Walker folded the message once, twice, then placed it carefully in his jacket pocket. When he spoke, his voice was perfectly steady. "Thank you, Flags. That will be all." "Sir, if there's anything..." "That will be all." The officer withdrew. Walker remained at the rail, watching the sun climb above the eastern horizon. He did not move for an hour. When he finally went below, his step was firm, his shoulders square. But something had changed. The calculated hunter had become something colder, something implacable. In the weeks that followed, Walker drove his group with relentless intensity. 2 weeks of continuous operations. 6 U-boats destroyed. 2 more probably sunk. 1 damaged and forced to abort its patrol. The second support group had become a scourge, and Admiral Dunitz's staff officers were marking Walker's hunting grounds on their charts with red circles labeled Danger Zone. But the Germans were adapting. Their scientists had developed new weapons, and by late August 1942, these weapons were reaching operational boats. The most dangerous was designated Zaunkönig, Wren, by its creators. The British would call it the Gnat. It was an acoustic torpedo, the first of its kind. Once launched, it listened for propeller noise and homed on the sound. following its target through any evasive maneuver. Against it, conventional anti-submarine tactics were worse than useless. The faster a ship fled, the louder its screws sang, the more certainly the torpedo found its mark. Walker knew nothing of this when dawn broke on the 14th of August, and Wild Goose reported an Aztec contact bearing 045, range 6,000 yards. Signal to group, form hunting line, Starling attacking. The 5 sloops spread across 2 miles of ocean, their sonar beams probing. The contact was firm and deep, 400 feet at least. Walker studied the plot. This one was making no effort to evade, just maintaining depth and course as though supremely confident. Confident or desperate, or equipped with something new. All ahead full. Standby depth charges. Starling accelerated, closing the range. 3,000 yards. 2,000. The Aztec pings came faster, the metallic echo strong and clear. At 1,000 yards, Walker gave the order. Fire. The pattern tumbled into the sea. 10 charges set for 300 and 400 feet. The ocean erupted in the familiar violence, great columns of water boiling skyward. But when the disturbance cleared, the Aztec held contact. The U-boat had ridden out the attack, still at depth, still steady. Walker frowned. Again. Closer pattern. Settings 400 and 500. Starling wheeled and ran in for a second attack. This time the charges bracketed the target perfectly. The shock waves rolled across the surface. Still, the submarine held depth. "She's got a good captain," Walker's executive officer observed. "Or new tactics. Signal Woodpecker and Signet to join the attack. We'll plaster her." 800 feet below, Captain Lieutenant Hartwig Lux watched his control room crew work with mechanical precision. U-264 had sailed from Lorient with 2 Zaunkönig torpedoes in her forward tubes and orders to test them against British escorts. Now one of those escorts was obligingly attacking, presenting a perfect target. Flood tubes 1 and 2. Open outer doors. Lux raised his periscope for a quick look. Through the surface disturbance, he could see the sloop's bow wave as she turned for another attack run. Range 1,200 meters and closing. He lowered the periscope. Fire 1. The torpedo left its tube with a metallic thump. Its motor engaged, and it began to swim, its acoustic sensors seeking, listening for the rhythmic thrashing of propellers. On Starling's bridge, a lookout suddenly shouted, "Torpedo track, Red 45, close aboard." Walker spun. There, a line of bubbles cutting through the water, arrow straight, heading directly for Starling's stern. An ordinary torpedo he could dodge, turn away from, outrun. But this one was tracking, adjusting its course to follow. Range 200 yards. Speed perhaps 40 knots. Time to impact. 12 seconds. Walker's mind raced through possibilities. Turn hard over. The torpedo would follow. Increase speed. It would only home faster on the louder propeller noise. Stop engines? Too slow, they would be dead in the water when it struck. 11 seconds. Then, with the clarity that comes in moments of absolute crisis, he saw it. The torpedo homed on sound. Give it a louder sound. Hard a port. Standby depth charges. Shallow setting. Fire on my command. Starling heeled into the turn, her wake curving. The torpedo adjusted, following. Range 100 yards. Fire! 2 depth charges rolled from the stern rails, set to detonate at 50 feet. They hit the water and sank rapidly. The torpedo was 10 seconds behind them, closing fast. Walker counted under his breath. 3, 2, 1. The ocean exploded. 2 massive detonations, so close together, they merged into one enormous blast. The shock wave lifted Starling's stern, shaking the entire ship. Every man on deck was thrown to the deck. Glass shattered in the wheelhouse. And 3 seconds later, a third explosion, sharper, different in tone. The torpedo, detonating in the shock wave of the depth charges, 5 yards from Starling's quarterdeck. The combined blast sent a column of water 300 feet into the air. When it collapsed, Starling's stern was buckled, her rails twisted, her depth charge racks blown clean off. But she was afloat, her engine still turning, her hull intact. Walker pulled himself to his feet, ears ringing. Around him, the bridge crew was rising, checking for injuries. The executive officer's face was white. "My God, sir, what was that?" "Acoustic homing. They've developed acoustic homing." Walker's voice was flat, emotionless. "Passed to all ships. New German weapon. Torpedo homes on propeller noise. Countermeasure, depth charges set shallow, detonate in the weapon's path." He turned to look aft at the damaged stern. They had survived by seconds and improvisation. Next time, the Germans might not give them those seconds. "Where's our friend?" "Still in contact, sir. Bearing 090, depth unchanged." "Signal to group. Plaster attack. All ships together. We're going to crush this one." The 5 sloops formed line abreast and began their run. This time, they held nothing back. Depth charges tumbled from every stern, shot from every thrower. Settings mixed, shallow, medium, deep. The barrage walked across half a mile of ocean, turning the sea into chaos. U-264 shuddered under the onslaught. Light bulbs shattered. Pipes burst. The hull groaned. Looks clutched the periscope column as his boat bucked and twisted. This was beyond anything he had experienced. This was murder. Take her deep. Emergency dive. 700 feet. But at 500 feet, the leaks were already spraying high-pressure jets through failing seals. At 600, the hull began to compress. At 650, a welded seam split with a sound like a gunshot. "Blow all ballast! Surface! Surface!" U-264's bow broke the surface at an angle, water cascading from her casing. Her conning tower hatch flew open and men poured out, only to meet a storm of machine gun fire from 5 converging warships. Lux stood in the shattered tower for 5 seconds, looking at his dying boat. Then he drew his pistol, placed it under his chin, and fired. 10 minutes later, U-264 slipped beneath the waves. Starling picked up 14 survivors from the water. None of them was the captain. Walker stood at the rail, watching the oil slick spread. 6 U-boats in 2 weeks. The price was rising, but so was the score. Timothy's death would be avenged 100 times over before this war ended. The group reformed and steamed north toward Liverpool. They needed repairs, resupply, rest. When they entered harbor 3 days later, Walker was promoted to captain and informed that 6 medals awaited him. The Distinguished Service Order with 2 bars, the French Croix de Guerre, and others. He accepted them without comment and went ashore to see his wife. 3 days later, scientists requested his services for anti-aircraft missile trials. The rest would have to wait. The second support group put to sea again on the 18th of August, bound for the Bay of Biscay to hunt radio-controlled bombs called Chase Me Charles. And on the 3rd day of that patrol, while Wild Goose was under attack by guided missiles, an officer below decks happened to be shaving with an electric razor. Every missile in that attack wobbled off course and crashed into the sea. The scientists were jubilant. Walker ordered every ship in the group to requisition electric shavers. 4 days later, facing another attack, they switched on all 4 razors simultaneously. Every missile swerved wildly and missed. The hunter had found another trick, The war continued. The convoy room at Plymouth headquarters was thick with cigarette smoke and tension when Walker arrived on the 5th of June, 1944. 40 officers crowded around the long table, studying charts of the English Channel marked with red symbols, each one representing a U-boat base on the French coast. Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay stood at the head of the table, his face drawn. "Gentlemen, Operation Overlord commences at dawn tomorrow. General Eisenhower has been explicit. The channel must be clear of U-boats from D-Day through D+14. 76 submarines are currently in the Biscay bases. Intelligence estimates most will attempt to reach the invasion area within 72 hours of the landings." He paused, letting the numbers sink in. 76 U-boats against the greatest invasion fleet ever assembled. If even a dozen broke through to the landing beaches, the carnage would be catastrophic. "Captain Walker, your second support group will coordinate the inner screen with 4 additional escort groups. 40 ships total. Your sector runs from Start Point to the Eddystone. Nothing gets through." Walker studied the chart. His sector covered 90 miles of approaches, 40 ships against 76 submarines. The mathematics were actually better than usual. "Understood, sir. 2 weeks. They won't get through." Someone at the table, a young lieutenant commander, spoke up. "Sir, surely some will penetrate. The odds—" Walker turned to look at him. The young officer fell silent under that gray stare. 2 weeks, Walker repeated quietly. Not one. At 0630 on the 6th of June, the invasion began. By 0800, the first U-boats were clearing the Biscay bases, racing north at flank speed on the surface, their captains pushing the diesels to maximum revolutions. They knew the British would be waiting, but they had their orders. Reach the channel, disrupt the invasion, sink everything possible. The first contact came at 11:15. Wild Goose reported a radar contact bearing 120, range 8 miles. Walker's response was immediate. "All groups, this is Starling. Contact designated target Alpha. Groups 2 and 4 engage. Groups 1 and 3 maintain patrol stations." 8 ships converged on the contact. The U-boat, caught on the surface, crash-dived at the last moment. The escorts formed a box around the swirl and began their methodical search. At 1340, after 2 hours of hunting, a massive oil slick erupted. The first submarine would not reach the channel. At 1420, 2 more contacts. Walker split his forces, sending groups after each. By 1700 hours, both were destroyed. The pattern continued through the night. Radar contacts, crash dives, hunts, kills. The U-boats came singly and in pairs, desperate to break through, willing to fight on the surface if necessary. None succeeded. By dawn on the 7th of June, D+1, 5 submarines had been destroyed. 3 more were damaged and forced to abort. Walker had not slept. He stood on Starling's bridge, hollow-eyed, coordinating the defense by signal lamp and radio. His voice was hoarse from giving orders, but his mind remained clear, calculating, anticipating the enemy's moves. At 0900, Starling's radar picked up a contact at extreme range. Walker studied the bearing. This one was trying to skirt around the northern edge of his patrol area, using the cover of the Cornish coast. "All ahead full. Signal to Wild Goose and Wren. Join us. We're going after this one personally." The 3 sloops raced north. The U-boat, detecting their approach, dived 15 miles from the coast. The water here was shallow, barely 400 feet, which limited the submarine's options but made sonar contact difficult amid the rock formations and thermal layers. For 6 hours they hunted, creeping back and forth across 3 miles of coastline. At 1530, Wren's ASDIC operator called contact. The chase was on. This U-boat captain was skilled and determined. He used every trick, hiding behind thermal layers, running along the bottom, stopping dead to reduce his acoustic signature. But Walker had hunted too many submarines to be fooled. He positioned his 3 ships in a triangle and slowly contracted the net. At 1800, with the sun low in the west, Walker ordered the attack. 30 depth charges fell in a carefully calculated pattern. The ocean erupted. When the water settled, wreckage floated to the surface. Wood, rubber, and oil. Target destroyed. Walker allowed himself no satisfaction. The tally was mounting, but so was his exhaustion. He had been at sea for 36 hours without rest, coordinating 40 ships, fighting 6 separate actions. His executive officer approached cautiously. "Sir, you need to sleep. Let me take the watch." "No, they're still coming. Signal from Group 4 reports 2 more contacts bearing." He swayed suddenly, gripping the rail. The executive officer caught his arm. "Captain, please, 4 hours. Just 4 hours." Walker pulled free. "When the 2 weeks are up, number 1, not before." He turned to the helmsman. "Course 180, full speed. We're joining Group 4. The days blurred together. D+2, 3, 4. The U-boats kept coming, and the second support group kept destroying them. Walker snatched sleep in 15-minute intervals, standing in the bridge wing, his body learning to rest while remaining upright. His face grew gaunt, gray shadows deepening under his eyes. His uniform hung loose on a frame that had lost 20 pounds in 10 days. The other captains were exhausted too. But they could rotate, could hand off to their executive officers, could rest. Walker would not. He coordinated every action, adjusted every tactical plan, appeared on the radio net for every contact. The 40 ships under his command began to function as extensions of his will. On D+7, the 13th of June, Walker's group destroyed 3 more U-boats in a single 12-hour period. The 3rd kill came at midnight, and when it was confirmed, Walker finally allowed himself to lean against the bridge combing. 14 days. They were halfway through. At dawn on the 14th, new intelligence arrived. The U-boats were withdrawing, pulling back to their bases to regroup. Of the 76 that had sortied, 23 were confirmed destroyed, 11 more probably sunk, and 9 damaged. Only 3 had managed to penetrate the defensive screen, and those 3 had been quickly hunted down and destroyed before they could reach the invasion fleet. Walker read the intelligence summary twice. Not one submarine had reached the landing beaches. Not one transport had been torpedoed. Eisenhower's 2 weeks had passed without a single U-boat attack on the invasion forces. The executive officer found him still standing at the rail at 0800, staring at nothing. "Orders, sir?" Walker took a long moment to answer. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Set course for Liverpool. Signal to all groups. Well done. Resume normal patrol rotation." He turned to go below, then paused. "And number 1? I'll take that sleep now." He made it as far as his cabin door before his legs gave out. The surgeon commander and 2 able seamen carried him to his bunk. He slept for 18 hours straight, waking only when Starling entered Liverpool Harbor on the 16th of June. On the dock, Admiral Horton waited with news. Captain Walker was to be knighted. The Battle of the Atlantic was won. The Channel was secure. Walker accepted the congratulations mechanically, his mind still numb with exhaustion. That evening, his wife Eileen saw him and was frightened by what she saw. Not the man she had married, but something worn down, hollowed out, held together only by will. But the war was not finished. The U-boats would return, and Walker would hunt them again. He had 2 weeks of rest coming. He took 3 days before returning to sea. The second support group entered Liverpool on the evening of July 7th, 1944. Starling led the formation into harbor, her ensign streaming, her crew lined on deck in their best uniforms, despite the exhaustion etched into every face. On the dock, Admiral Horton waited with his staff, and behind them, a crowd had gathered. Dockyard workers, civilians, officers from other ships. Word had spread. Captain Walker was coming home. The sloop secured alongside at 18:30 hours. Walker descended the gangway with the careful precision of a man whose body no longer quite obeyed him. Horton stepped forward and saluted. Captain Walker, on behalf of the Admiralty, I'm authorized to inform you that His Majesty will confer a knighthood in recognition of your services to the nation. Walker returned the salute. Thank you, sir. His voice was steady, but thin, as though coming from a great distance. Horton studied the gaunt face before him. You're to take a month's leave, Captain. That's an order. Spend time with your family. Rest. Yes, sir. But they both knew he would be back at sea long before the month expired. Walker had become something that could not stop, a mechanism wound too tight, running on momentum alone. Eileen waited at the gate in a dark blue dress, her face carefully composed. When Walker reached her, she took his arm and felt bone where muscle had been. She said nothing until they were in the car driving home through the summer evening. Johnny, you look dreadful. Just tired. A few days of sleep will set me right. A few days. She kept her voice neutral, but her hand tightened on his. The Admiralty man said a month. Yes, a month. He stared out the window at the passing streets, seeing nothing. Liverpool had suffered badly in the bombing. Whole neighborhoods reduced to rubble, churches burned to shells, parks filled with anti-aircraft batteries. But it was still standing, still fighting, like him. At home, Eileen made dinner, watching him pick at his food with growing alarm. He ate perhaps a quarter of what she served before pushing the plate away. Not hungry? Ship's food has been poor lately. My appetite's off. After dinner, he sat in his chair by the window, staring at nothing. Eileen brought him tea and sat across from him, searching for something to say, some way to reach him. The man in the chair looked like her husband, but the vital spark that had animated him seemed dimmed, banked down like a fire dying to coals. Would you like to go to the cinema tomorrow? She asked finally. Madame Curie is showing at the Odeon. They say it's quite good. He focused on her slowly, as though returning from somewhere far away. Yes, that would be nice. The next afternoon, they walked to the cinema through streets bright with July sunshine. Walker moved carefully, like a man much older than his 48 years. At the theater, he bought 2 tickets, and they found seats in the half-empty afternoon crowd. The film was well made, the story of Marie Curie's life and work compelling. But halfway through, Walker leaned close to Eileen and whispered, "Do you hear that?" "Hear what?" "A humming, like engines, very distant." She listened. Only the film's soundtrack and the usual theater sounds. "No, dear, there's nothing." He subsided, but his hand kept going to his ear, pressing against it as though to stop a sound only he could hear. When the film ended and they emerged into the late afternoon light, Walker stumbled on the theater steps. Eileen caught his arm. "Johnny!" "Just dizzy. It'll pass." But his face had gone gray, a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the mild weather. At home, he was violently sick, doubled over the toilet while Eileen held his shoulders. When the spasm passed, he sat on the bathroom floor, breathing hard. "I'm calling the doctor." "No need. Just something I ate." "Johnnie Walker, you're going to hospital if I have to drag you there myself." He managed a weak smile. "Yes, ma'am." The hospital admitted him at 2100 hours. The examining physician was reassuring. "Exhaustion, Mrs. Walker. Nothing rest won't cure. We'll keep him overnight for observation. But I expect he'll be right as rain in a day or two." Eileen sat by his bed as he drifted into sleep. In the dim light of the ward, he looked shrunken, ancient. She held his hand, calloused from years at sea, scarred across the knuckles from some long-ago accident, and tried to remember when she had last seen him truly rest. The night nurse found her there at midnight and gently suggested she go home. "He's sleeping peacefully, Mrs. Walker. Best thing for him. Come back in the morning." She left reluctantly, glancing back from the ward door. He lay utterly still, his breathing shallow but regular. At 0200, Walker's condition deteriorated rapidly. The duty physician was called. At 0315, the hospital telephoned Eileen. At 0345, a staff car was sent to collect her. She arrived at 0410. Too late. Captain Johnnie Walker, Distinguished Service Order and 2 bars, had died at 0400 hours on the 9th of July, 1944. The official cause was cerebral thrombosis. The true cause was written in the operational logs of the 2nd Support Group. 36 months of continuous operations, 500 days at sea, 37 major actions, 23 U-boats destroyed under his direct command. The body that had carried him through all of it had simply stopped. The news reached Admiral Horton at dawn. He stood in his office overlooking the Mersey, the signal flimsy crumpled in his fist, and for the first time in his long career, he wept. By noon, the word had spread throughout the Western Approaches Command. Ships in harbor lowered their flags to half-mast. At sea, escort groups observed a moment of silence. In the Admiralty in London, staff officers who had called Walker a heretic 2 years earlier sat in stunned silence. The funeral was held 5 days later at Liverpool Cathedral. The coffin, draped with the white ensign, was borne by 6 captains from Walker's group. 2,000 mourners filled the cathedral. Sailors, officers, dockyard workers, ordinary civilians who had never met him but knew what he had accomplished. Admiral Horton delivered the eulogy. He spoke of duty and sacrifice, of courage and innovation. But mostly he spoke of the Atlantic, now finally clear of the U-boat menace that had nearly strangled Britain. 21 million tons of Allied shipping lost, 15 million tons to U-boats, 781 U-boats destroyed, 35,000 German submariners killed, and at the center of it all, one man who had changed the mathematics of the hunt, who had transformed defense into offense, who had driven himself beyond human limits until there was nothing left. History will record, Horton concluded, his voice breaking, that Captain Walker did more to free the Atlantic than any other single officer. But those of us who knew him will remember something else. He gave everything. His health, his son, finally, his life. The war demanded it all, and he paid. The congregation stood as the coffin was carried out. Outside, a guard of honor presented arms. A bugler played the last post, the notes echoing off the cathedral stone walls. Eileen Walker stood alone by the grave as they lowered her husband into the earth. Around her, officers and men wept openly. But she remained dry-eyed, her face set. There would be time for tears later. Now there was only the knowledge that the war had taken him as surely as any torpedo or shell. The Battle of the Atlantic was won. The price was paid in full.